Yes, thank you very much, Joe. I'm going to share my screen because I've got some pictures. Let me see. Yes, yes, I'm Stephen Cave. I direct the Leverhulme Centre for the Future of Intelligence at the University of Cambridge, where we look very broadly at the ethics and impact of AI. I too would like to commend the committee on this excellent report and the amazing job they've done of so succinctly assessing a hugely complex area. And as we've already heard, the report picks up on the 7 key requirements for trustworthy AI proposed by the high-level expert group. And in the next few minutes, I, like Phil, want to focus on one of those: diversity, non-discrimination, and fairness. But I think from a very different perspective to Phil, and I totally hear what he says about being careful of exposing people to a diversity of views, no matter how absurd. That's not the kind of diversity I want to talk about. I really want to talk about combating racial and gender bias. And I think this is absolutely key. It's at the heart of ensuring that AI for people means AI for all people. And as we've already heard, media technologies play a really critical role in either supporting or hindering that kind of diversity and fairness, as illustrated in this little slide, which just shows a kind of vicious cycle of injustice. At the top, we have diversity in this classic sense of sort of who's in the room. If there's a lack of diversity in a certain sector, such as the technology sector or the media sector, we get bias. It's not the only source of bias, but it's an important one. Biases, of course, exacerbate existing social injustices, and those social injustices shape the culturally dominant narratives and ideologies, in particular those in the media, and those, of course, then impact on diversity. That's the vicious cycle I want to portray. So this cycle is, of course, relevant to many sectors, but I think it's particularly important to the media because the media determines what culturally prevalent is and means to such a large extent, and therefore has such an important relationship to diversity and social justice. And the use of AI in this sector can exacerbate exactly this problem because of the tendency of algorithms to reproduce existing biases, as we all know. And the report notes how this can happen across the 4 themes the report focuses on, and in particular, automated content generation and automated content mediation, which the report picks out as a particularly high concern for diversity and fairness. Now, this can, of course, happen in ways that impact on many domains, almost every domain across society. But I want to illustrate this problem with a little case study looking at perceptions of AI itself. So this is a little bit meta, if you like. But as many of you probably have noticed, if you Google the term artificial intelligence, you will get results that look something like this. And you're probably so used to seeing these images, you just switch off. But what I want to draw your attention to is the fact that in every case where an actual human is shown, they are racially white, they're Caucasian, and all the robots are white in color. And this is a theme that recurs across media. Real humanoid robots tend to be white. AI in films like Terminator or Blade Runner tend to be played by white actors. And most clearly of all, in stock images, which you see all the time, robots are white, usually both in color and sort of racialized as Caucasian. And these stock images are particularly problematic because of the way that automated content mediation systems perpetuate them. These are, of course, the images that thousands of online articles that you see every day about AI use as illustration, which means that the search engines, when you Google AI, pick up on exactly these kind of images. And because it's what the search engines then deliver to people, it is what people use to illustrate their articles. And so we have this kind of vicious cycle. In a recent paper with my colleague, Cantor Dihal here in Cambridge, we argued that this matters, that this whiteness relates to a very long history of advanced technology being associated with white people, historical associations between the concept of intelligence and eugenics and imperialism, imperialist discourse, the legitimation of imperialism. And this is particularly problematic for AI. And here are some of the kind of implications: the amplification of existing prejudices about who is and who isn't intelligent, who is and who isn't driving technology, the further marginalization of people of color, and misdirection of concerns about AI. So, you know, worrying excessively about middle-class jobs because we think robots are engineers, like this one here, when in fact we know that these technologies impact disproportionately on the already marginalized. So that is a point about how AI itself is portrayed and about how those portrayals are exacerbated by AI itself. I want to very briefly make a related point about how the creators of AI are portrayed, about how AI scientists and engineers are portrayed. And my colleagues at Cambridge and I are currently surveying portrayals of AI scientists in mainstream visual media, film and television in particular. Here are some famous examples: Westworld, Metropolis, RoboCop, Terminator, Ex Machina, and so on. Our preliminary results, we haven't published yet, suggest that well over 90% of portrayals of AI scientists and engineers are men. And of course, there is substantial evidence that media representations influence young people's career choices, and also they influence employers' ideas of who would be a good fit for their organization. So these kind of representations are contributing to the lack of diversity in the field, and so perpetuating the vicious cycle I sketched at the beginning. And I just want to point out, to conclude, that even extremely well-meaning people can fall into these kinds of trap. For example, this is the AI4People report, with a wonderful white bot and white hand on the front cover, and another white bot, just a few pages inside with a full cover spread. And if you Google AI4People's ethical framework, you get driven to this page, AI4People, or AI for middle-aged white men. Now, I don't want to be mean in highlighting AI4People in particular, of course, because we see this everywhere. It's so normal. It's like the air we breathe. We expect to see men, we expect to see white people. And AI itself threatens to exacerbate exactly this problem. Racial and gender biases, despite all the immense progress in the last century, are still embedded in our societies. The use of AI in the media has the power to exacerbate them, and indeed in some ways already is, which will perpetuate this cycle of injustice that will stop the problem from being fixed unless we break the vicious cycle. And I just want to conclude by commending the report for highlighting these important issues and recommending the kind of educational measures and guidelines that I think will really make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for these interesting and critical remarks. I'm very happy our panel is a majority of female scholars and experts. So in that sense, we try to possibly do it differently. And then the last, before we go into the break, I'd like to give the floor to Robert Madeline as member of the AI4People Scientific Committee and also former Director General of TG Connect. Robert?